Hey guys, welcome back. So today we're working on this 5,000 watt Powermate generator. This one I found on Facebook Marketplace. The person selling it was only asking $75. According to the description, this is a parts machine or potentially could be repaired. So yeah, 75 bucks, kind of a lot of money considering we're missing so many things on this machine. So I offered him 50 bucks and he accepted. So for better or worse, here it is. Anyway, the thing that really drew me in was this engine. I have a soft spot for Subaru engines. This one rotates and has compression. So theoretically it should run, but we're missing a lot of things. We have no airbox, no air filter, no starter recoil, no tank, and the exhaust, it's been modified. We have a pipe running down to the ground. So yeah, this machine, if we do decide to repair it, it's going to need quite a few things. Anyway, I say we start with the engine. Let's see if we can get it to run. And if it does, how does it sound? And does the generator still work? All right, first things first, let's check the oil. I want to try starting this. For all I know, it runs fine, and we just need to replace the missing parts. The guy didn't say, I didn't ask, and, for 50 bucks, it doesn't really matter. The carburetor alone, assuming it's any good, costs over $100 new, so this will easily pay for itself one way or another. So we got plenty of oil. It's very dark. Desperately needs to be changed, but let's get some heat in the oil first. And assuming the engine runs, we'll give it an overdue oil change. Well, the other thing that attracted me to this engine, besides the fact I like Subaru engines, is that, I tore down a Subaru EX30 about a year or two ago. So I have a lot of the parts that this engine needs to make it complete, starting with the starter recoil. So I'm going to get this off. We'll bolt it on. And we'll add a bit of fuel to the carburetor. Pull it over and see what happens. Let's just pull the bolt real quick on the drain, see if the carburetor was stored dry. Now, the drain is supposed to be right here. It's actually facing forward, so someone has had this open at some point. So instead, I'm just going to loosen this bottom bolt up. Actually, I can probably take it out because most likely the bowl is stuck. And nothing's coming out, but there is corrosion and rust on here. So likely the carb isn't in great shape. But let's give it the benefit of the doubt. It's at least dry. So we'll add some fuel and see if we can start it. It's taking a lot of fuel, although it is slowing down, so maybe the needle and seat are working. All right, needle and seat, they're holding. Let's give it a try. All right, let's give this a try. Ignition on, got a light plugged in and turned on. In the event it starts, we can see if it makes power. And the choke is on. Oh, it tried. It's trying, it's kicking a little bit. Try with the choke open. Yeah, I was not expecting that. I gave it a good few pulls with the choke on. It was showing signs of life, but not much. I then turned that choke off and first pull with the choke off, and this thing came right to life. The engine sounded good, and we're making power. But we do have a couple issues. And I guess first off, the carb wouldn't run well without the choke partially on. So we do need to clean that. And surprisingly, this modified exhaust system let out a huge cloud of soot and carbon. You can see some of it there and pretty much on everything over here. So yeah, this was a brand new squeeze bottle. Used it for the first time tonight, and it's just coated in this carbon. So yeah, we're gonna have to do something about that. But for now, let's get the oil changed. It's definitely earned it. Well, it's definitely well-used oil, but there's no metallic in there, no glitter, no shiny bits. So that is a good sign. Let's clean this up a bit while we're here. So just a bit of WD-40 and a brush should remove most of this grime. All right, let's get the fuel out of the carb first. Now, I'm really hoping we can get this carb to run right. You know, the last time I bought one of these carbs, it was $120, and I made the mistake of looking online on how much they are now. This carburetor is $230. That's before tax and shipping, and this generator probably isn't worth much more than that. So we definitely want to use this if we can. There are clones available, but for the EX27 and EX30 engines, they don't run the engine well. They're actually run the engine too rich. So the OEM carb is really the only viable option here. Okay, the bowl isn't that bad. There is a little bit of gel down here on the bottom, and that could absolutely cause this to run poorly. And we have some more gel and corrosion down on the bottom. Got the main jet right there, which looks like it might have a little bit of that gel in it. And the pilot jet is up there. So let's get the jets out. We'll get the needle and float out. The emulsion tube, unfortunately, is not removable. So hopefully that is not clogged up. There we go. And the pins on these Mikunis that hold the float in, they are a tight fit. You have to be really careful removing it. You do need to tap it with a punch very lightly, but you don't want to hit it so hard that you break these ears, or else the whole carburetor is trash, and those ears, they do break off quite easily. Needle looks to be in pretty good shape. And that just leaves the pilot jet. So this screw here almost never comes out without using vice grips, but let's try to break it free the right way. Nope. And that pilot jet, it's just a pressed fit. Or maybe not pressed, but there's no threads. It's just an O-ring in there. So usually I just turn it back and forth to make sure it's free, which it is. And then you need a good pair of needle nose pliers, or potentially a screw just to thread in that hole to pull that jet out. So that one might have a little bit junk on it. Anyway, I'm going to go through all the openings, all the passages, just make sure they are clear, and then we'll give this a good soak in the ultrasonic. I'm also going to go through everything with Carb Cleaner. You know, these carbs, even when they're spotless, they're jetted extremely lean and tend to surge a little bit without a load. So we want to give this one the best chance possible. Yeah, nothing's clogged so far, which isn't good because that means it might be an internal passage that's clogged. And actually that one did seem a little bit obstructed. So I give it hope. But the passage I'm mostly concerned about is the one that runs right here. The main jet is there. You know, fuel comes in, the emulsion tube will pull it up under high load. But when there's no load, there's a passage right here, which brings fuel up to the pilot circuit. And that, there is no direct way to clean it. So carb spray is probably the best way to do it. I think I may have found the problem, or at least one of the problems. If you look at the bottom of the cup, this is the fuel that came out of the bowl, and you can see a well-defined water line right there. And these carbs, they cannot pull water through the main jet. So if there was enough water, this engine would not have run at all. But even something like this, which obviously wasn't covering the main jet, you know, it could have been close enough that it was causing a performance issue. So I think between the water and the gel, you know, that might explain why this carb wasn't running too well. Carb cleaned up really well. But before I put it back together, I do want to take this gasket off. This is the one that goes between the engine and the carburetor, and it has to be perfect. You can see that got ripped when removing this from the machine. So we'll clean that up real good. And actually, we have a clog down here. I believe the vent is down there. Actually, it's up here. Yeah. So it has to be able to vent air, or else, yeah, it's going to flood over and just not work right. So we'll make sure that's cleaned up, as well as this old material. All right, looks like the seal is in there good. So we need to put the needle and float in first before the main jet. Last but not least, we have the pilot jet. So I usually drop that in and just use a screwdriver to kind of twist and push, just to make sure it's fully seated, which it seems to be. And then we just put this bracket back, which holds that in place. Okay, let's try it out. I also pulled off the insulator because the gasket behind here was also damaged. So I do have new Subaru gaskets. I usually stock those because, well, of the problem mentioned earlier, they never come off clean. So I'm going to start just by getting this insulator back on with this gasket here, which I think goes like that. So I'm going to use the original airbox backing. I do have a complete airbox for this engine from that same blown up engine. So I'll move the air filter and the cover over from that. And without these parts, the starter recoil, the airbox, and even the carburetor, repairing this wouldn't be feasible. I looked up the price of these parts and was shocked to see the recoil, $180, airbox, $120 without a filter. The carburetor price actually went up to $230. So for these three things alone, it would be $500 plus tax and shipping. So that's the cover I'm going to use, and I was planning on using the filter. I thought it was in good shape, but then I looked on the other side, and unfortunately this is just turning into dust. So I think I have a new one of these as well. Yeah, and this is what I'm going to use right here. It's an aftermarket filter made in the USA, which I'm okay with because, like everything else on this machine, the OEM filters are quite expensive. So these, I think, are about half the price, and they seem to fit perfectly in the OEM box. All right, let's try it out. That carb is running the engine absolutely perfect. No more surging whatsoever. So the engine, it's 100%. And the power output looking good too, although I did have a bit of a scare when that light went out. But thankfully, it was a bad light bulb. And I guess the question is, Why did it burn out? Was it time, or is the voltage too high? And it might be a little bit of both. This does not have an AVR, so without a load, the voltage is going to be high, around 130 volts. So we'll check that in a bit. But for now, let's move on. I want to figure out what to do about this exhaust system. As far as the exhaust goes, I'm leaning towards cutting off everything that was added to it. It really doesn't serve a lot of purpose for most people. I think whoever owned this before actually did a really good job of attaching this pipe. And if you were to run this inside, you would want something like that, where you could clamp on an exhaust pipe to just vent the exhaust outside. That said, though, I don't think most people would run it that way. And having the pipe where it is, it's right up against the furniture dolly, or if you put this down in your yard, that's going to be touching the grass, and likely bad things will happen. So before cutting this off, I'm going to take a peek with the borescope and just make sure the original exhaust face is still there and that they didn't cut it out when installing this piece. Yeah, it looks like it's there. I can just kind of get a glimpse of it right there. So I think the exhaust is unmodified, so I guess we're going to find out. Let's start cutting and hopefully not destroy this exhaust system, because I cannot get another one like this to fit this generator. It's the next day, the paint's nice and dry, and it came out really good considering what it looked like before we started. So, I was about to bolt that back on and not actually do anything about the frame. The majority of the frame is actually pretty good. I think the biggest area of concern is right here on the control panel. So I do want to at least patch that up. The issue is I don't have this paint color. So I'm kind of worried if I paint this front that I might have to keep going because the color may not match too well. But I did find one that I think is a pretty close match. So if I paint just the control panel, I think that'll fix this issue. If anything, it's going to make it look too nice versus the rest of the machine. But I think we should start there. And likely I'm going to put a little bit of paint on the stator as well. Now, I don't want to sand this. I might wire wheel it lightly and just put a quick coat of black on it because I don't want to damage the laminations, but I do want to get a little bit of protection on there. Just using these towels to block the vents to kind of minimize the amount of dust getting into the stator. Might have been a bad idea. What do you think? It came out pretty well, considering it was just a rattle can paint job with a color that wasn't quite the right color. I was really concerned it wasn't going to match and then I'd end up having to paint the whole thing. But it actually blended in really well. To be fair though, I did kind of dust it in going down those side rails just to make the transition a bit more unnoticeable. And Yeah, I don't think anyone would notice that that is a slightly different shade red. So the frame, I would say, is done. The stator also came out very well. So I'm going to let those kind of cure up a bit before putting this thing back together. But while that is drying, I'm actually going to make a trip to the storage locker. This originally had a wheel kit. I have the handle, but I don't have wheels or the feet. And I do have another Powermate in storage that is a parts machine. It has both of those parts that we need. It's a different model, so they may not fit, but my hope is that they will. So let's go harvest those parts. We'll bring them back, and with any luck, we'll get them to fit onto this frame. All right, these are the two right here that I was thinking of. Both are the same model. They are Powermates. One has no compression, which I think is this one. Yep. And the other one has compression, but a bad power head. So this one, I think, is the one I'm going to steal the wheels from. So let's get this a little bit better situated. We'll get you guys set up a little better so you can see, and we'll harvest the parts we need. I'm noticing a problem already. I only brought down wrenches, and we have a push nut. So that has to be pried off. And I'm not sure I have any tools to do that. So let me look around, see what I can come up with. Well, we got the parts that we came for, but now that they're off, I can see we're going to have issues. Although I think these parts will attach to the machine without modification, the problem is these wheels, they're just too wide in diameter. And if you take the foot, the bottom of the foot, and line it up to the bottom of the wheel, you can see this foot, the top of it, is where the rail is on the generator. And the axle hole for the wheel, it's only about an inch above this spot right here. So, right about there. So if we put these wheels on, one side of the machine is going to be quite a bit higher than the other. And, the only reason it worked on this machine is because this axle is pretty high up from that bottom rail. And that is not typical on most machines. So likely we're going to have to come up with a plan B. But, let's get these back and just see how close we are. I was just on the way out, and I walked by this Generac GP5000 parts frame and realized it also has a foot that might help us out. It's actually a good inch longer than the ones we just harvested. So I'm going to get this one off, bring it back, and potentially that could save us. All right, I've got this wheel loosely installed. Now, I've already taken some measurements and I can tell this wheel likely isn't going to work out. You know, it measures 12 inches in diameter, and most wheels on generators sold today are actually 10 inches in diameter, including the generator that this foot came from. So the gap between the axle and the top of this foot should measure approximately 1 inch. And if we take a measurement here, you can see we're just about at the 2-inch mark. So either we need a taller bracket by about 1 inch, which I don't have, or we need to use 10-inch wheels. Now, I do have 10-inch wheels. They're actually from a Generac, and I was hoping to use them on a Generac. But given we need 10-inch wheels for this machine, I think we're going to have to use them. So if I take the same measurement by aligning the bottom of this bracket with the bottom of the tread and moving it over, and if we take the same measurement, you'll see that gap has closed to about 1 inch. So I think this combination should solve our problem. Unfortunately, the handle's not locking in place. So, you know, this pin, it's actually supposed to be inserted into kind of a spacer that's back here. It's made out of plastic. You know, it's held in place by that bolt, and it has a couple holes to kind of locate the part in the correct position. And once that's there, it provides some structure to hold the pin firmly in place and lock the handle. Unfortunately, that didn't come with the machine, and I don't have one of those parts, and the part's discontinued. So I'm going to have to take a look on eBay. Potentially I can locate something there. You know, for now, I'm just going to bolt the handle in the down position, and we can circle back on this if I can locate the part needed. It's looking pretty good. We are sitting nice and level. Not much more to do. I think the biggest outstanding thing is right here. There is a missing access panel. This is access to replace the brushes. And these terminals, they produce upwards of about 200 volts DC. So you definitely want that covered. Unfortunately, that is a discontinued part. But I do have a couple spare Powermate generators. So I stole the cover from one of them. And this should just snap right in place. So at this point, I've taken it pretty much as far as I can. This thing is nearly perfect. So I say we roll it outside, get it started, and put it to the test. All right, let's give this a quick try. There's a storm moving in, and it's getting pretty gusty out, so I don't have a lot of time. But really, what I want to double check here is just the engine. I want to make sure it's still capable of pulling its rated load of 5,000 watts. So I'm going to get the engine started. We'll let it warm up. While it's doing that, we will double check the output, both the voltage and the hertz, and we'll check the power quality. We have the amp probe to see what the THD is, as well as the oscilloscope so we can see what the sine wave looks like. Once it's warmed up, we'll bring it up to about half load, double check the outputs, and then go for the max of 5,000 watts. All right, the fuel's on, engine's on, and the choke is on. All right, the engine started without issue, and the no-load engine speed is good at about 61.3 hertz. The voltage, though, I'm concerned about. It's starting at about 117, maybe 118 volts, and this generator has no AVR, so the voltage should actually be higher than that without a load, closer to 130 volts. So when we put a full load on this, usually generators without an AVR, they drop by about 20 volts. So I'm thinking that voltage may drop to about 100 volts under a full load. So I guess we will find out in a minute. As far as the THD goes, without a load, it's around 13-14% THD. And the sine wave, yeah, it doesn't look great. So let's bring on a half load and see how it does. So we'll start with 1,000 watts. No issues. So let's swap that out. We'll do 2,000. 2,500. So under that kind of a load, THD actually didn't change a whole lot. About 14%, just a little bit above. And the sine wave did clean up just a bit. So yeah, unfortunately at half load, we're already down to 105 volts, which is too low. It's only going to get worse. So I think there is something wrong with the bridge rectifier in this generator. So I am going to take the load off, shut the engine down, and I might have another I can swap in there real quick. So this very well could be why this generator was sold. And there's no easy way to get to the bridge rectifier. You actually have to take the entire end housing off, which is held on by the stator bolts. So not a tough job, but it's more work than it should be for something like this that does need maintenance once in a while. So these here are the brushes, and it's connected to the bridge rectifier. So we have to unplug that, and we can pull the brushes out and then pull this cover off. Yeah, I'm not sure how well this shows up, but the capacitor here, it's definitely bulged right on the top. I can feel it and see it. So it's a very common failure on these boards, especially as they get old. Now this is a discontinued part, but this is easily repairable. So I usually send these out to my friend Gary, who has a business repairing these and some other boards. And that's exactly what I did with this board. This came from another generator that had a bad capacitor, so he put a brand new one in. So this board should fix our problem. So before I get it installed, I'm going to take a second, just clean up the slip rings. I'm going to clean up the shaft as well. Put a little bit of grease on there for the roller bearing. And I noticed we do have maybe a broken piece of lacing here. Doesn't look burned, but I'm going to trim that off as well so it doesn't get caught up in the rotor. So just a little bit of grease. I don't want this stuff flinging onto the slip rings. And I'll do the same on the ball bearing. Or I should say the roller bearing. All right, let's try this again really quick. Pretty sure I just felt some raindrops, so we don't have a lot of time here. Things are looking a lot better now. Without a load, we're at 126 volts, which is still on the low side of what I'd expect, but a lot better. Usually without a load, these come in at 127 volts, all the way up to about 133 volts. So let's put the half load on again, see what the voltage does. Yeah, much better. At a half load, we're at close to 117 volts, and the engine's holding fine at 60.1 Hertz. And like last time, under a half load, we're at 13.4% THD, and the sine wave looks about the same. So let's go for the max of 5,000. So we're at 2,500 now. We'll bring on another 2 and a 5. So we're at 5,000 watts. THD jumped to 17.9%, and the sine wave looks about the same. It's been a few minutes, no issues at 5,000 watts. Let's take the 500s off, replace it with 1,000. So we're back up to 5,000. Let's try an overload of 5,500. about 6,000. Wow, it's doing it, but I think we're going to blow a circuit breaker at this load. We're at 19.4% THD. The sine wave pretty much unchanged. Well, surprisingly, it's holding at 6,000 watts. Although, to be fair, the voltage drops to 102 volts, so it's not actually 6,000 watts. You know, it's volts times amps, so yeah, it's not quite as good as it looks. So we'll give it a minute, we'll let things cool down, and finish this up before we get rained on. Well, guys, that's pretty much a wrap. You know, the rains, I think they're getting pretty close. The wind is picking up, so I'm going to have to make this fast. But I think, root issue here, maybe why the prior owner sold this so cheap and stripped all the parts off it, was because, you know, he thought it was bad. With the regulator that was in there, with the bad capacitor, under a full load, this would have been producing probably 98, maybe 97 volts, which is pretty low. So with the good regulator in there, we are starting about 10 volts higher without a load at 126 volts. And under a full load, it came down by about 20 volts as expected to 107 volts. And that's pretty much as good as you can expect for something like this without an automatic voltage regulator. So in the end, you know, this didn't need a whole lot other than all the parts it was missing and a bit of paint. And of course, a new capacitor. So, I hope this video helps someone. Thanks for watching.